Okay.
Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. According to a January 2024 report by the U.S. Census Bureau, the average cost for preschool, infant care, and daycare in the District of Columbia is $24,243 a year. That's about $460 a week. It is the highest in the nation. Maryland is about $15,335 a year. Virginia, $14,063 a year. The national average is about $14,470 per year. Those numbers are just the backdrop for what may be a looming daycare crisis in DC. Proposed budget cuts to the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund could mean higher daycare costs and less money for teaching staff. Now, there is a lot to unpack for tonight's discussion. My guests are LaDawn Love, DC child care advocate and executive director of Spaces in Action, a grassroots community organization supporting families and child care, and LaShayna Ham Campbell, owner and director of Petite Scholars, daycare for infants and toddlers in DC. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Let me first start with you, LaDawn. There have been some pretty muscular demonstrations about the equity fund. Talk to me about what happened last week. What was the message?
Yeah. So last week was, I'm going to say it was both on the offensive and the defensive. The mayor cut $70 million out of the budget, which is earmarked for the Pay Equity Fund. That fund allows assistant teachers and lead teachers to receive between $5,000 and $14,000 a year. In addition to that, it created health care for childcare so that the childcare workforce now has access to health care. In one sweep of the pen, the mayor eliminated the program, which means educators who have been receiving this pay supplement that has helped them to take care of bills, take care of debt, take care, maybe buy a home, go on vacation, whatever they decided to do with this money that they very, very well deserved was just taken away. And so our actions that we've been doing, and so last week we did a rally right before the hearing. It was the last hearing, which is CAL, which is the Committee of the Whole. And during that hearing, all of the different organizations that work on childcare. So we're one of many. We do a lot of grassroots organizing because we want to work with folks who are directly impacted and help them tell their story and connect it to policy solutions. But that hearing was an opportunity and the last opportunity to let the council know what we needed them to do. There's a lot of lip service coming from the council saying, we're going to restore the funds. We need actions, not lip service. And the mayor did not back down on that cut. That cut is in the budget that she put out, supposedly in response to the CFO, which is Glenn Lee, who told her she needed to close the budget. But why close the budget on the backs of Black and brown people, majority women who work in the childcare sector? That is not right. It is a backward way of thinking. And so this action that took place on the steps of the Wilson building, which was coordinated by one of our partners, which is the Under 3 DC Coalition, and our organization helped to plan it and implement it, was to let the mayor know we're watching, we don't accept it, and to also remind the council that they need to make sure that they close that budget gap some other way, create another way of generating revenue. We have some ideas on that as well, so that this pay equity fund can be put back in place, so that groups like LaShay, who has centers, are able to provide the care for the families who need it. But she doesn't only help families, she helps businesses. Those businesses whose workers need childcare can't work if they don't have a safe, nurturing, secure place that they can send their children to. So that's why we were on those steps.
Of course, the mayor would argue that this is a a particularly difficult budget year. She has discussed this quite a bit. She has also said that some of the pandemic era funding that was coming from the federal government is no longer there, and that she has to make some really tough choices. What say you to that, LaDawn, when you look at some of the cuts? And obviously this isn't the only cut in the budget. There are
Mhm.
some other difficult things, and that's a completely different conversation. But obviously this is one of those issues that is on the chopping block, and she said she has to make tough choices.
Yeah. She also said that we have to have shared sacrifice. I
Mhm.
don't understand how it's shared sacrifice. It's on the backs of low-income workers, on the backs of the providers who have been giving this service selflessly, taking care of children. Some of them have their own children in addition to the children that they care for at centers. And there's other ways that the budget could be balanced. Let's also reflect back on a few days before she dropped her budget. There was this big to do about giving $515 billion to the Capitol Arena. Now, that money is
You
some
need
of it,
million,
yes, so
million.
a million,
Yeah,
million, sorry,
not billion, but
550
million.
million
Yes,
for
million.
the Capitol
Mhm.
Arena. See, when it gets that big, I never had that much in my account, so sometimes I mix those numbers up. But $515 million for the Capitol Arena. And it was done the same thing with a flick of a pen, and it went past really fast. There was no big discussion about it in public. Only thing we saw was that this money was being moved. Why then do you have to take 70 million from childcare? And yes, there are many other programs that are also being cut that also provide services not only to people who work in a childcare area or in that sector, but people who work in other sectors in DC that will be hurt. And we're still talking about the majority of low income people, the majority of people who are Black and brown. And the mayor is making these decisions without thinking about how this is going to impact those communities when there's other ways to the budget, and also there's other revenue generating opportunities that can be utilized to close that gap.
Lashada, let's talk a little bit about the business of childcare. You're not just running some storefront childcare place. You have a huge business. You have 6 childcare centers, and you're literally, while we're talking, you are in the 7th that is planned, I believe, for Capitol Hill.
Yes.
You employ dozens, and what 24 people, teachers
No,
alone.
about
Just
75.
yeah, 75 teachers.
Yes. Across
Yeah,
the campuses. Yes.
yeah. So yes, dozens and dozens. So you realize the difficulty of sustaining the business and making sure that employees are paid, but you also realize some of the challenges and difficulties that new parents are having to deal with in order to get their children into these daycare centers. Kind of walk us through, first of all, what you're hearing from parents even before this issue
Mhm.
has come up.
And I will tell you, Petite Scholars began in a very organic way where I was a DC resident and a DC PS principal. And I had a son who was born severely premature. And I lived in the neighborhood where the majority of my campuses currently exist. So my son was born at 29 weeks. He couldn't even enter childcare until he was 2 years old because of health challenges of being born very premature. And when I looked for childcare in the neighborhood, there just wasn't any. And what was available was of very poor quality or very expensive. There was no in between. And this is almost 16, 17 years ago. And so Petite Scholars has existed now for 13 years. And when I open, and our campuses are small. So it sounds like 6 is a lot, but our campuses on average have a capacity of 30 to 50 kids. So we are community centered where our families get to know their teachers. they become a part of the community. Like we have cohorts of families who've been together since infancy. Their children are now in middle school, but they create community within community. So yes, we're providing a service, but we're also providing this amazing connection to community where people who are transient and transplants would not otherwise have that level of community within the city. So we're creating these small little nuggets of community-centered, community-filled programs in an otherwise, large city where people don't really get to have that level of connection, and we help create that connection. So that's one piece of it. But the other part is there are 6 campuses because families kept coming. Childcare is current data says about 40% of families who are even seeking childcare have the opportunity to put their children in a center. And that's why they're home-based or, program center-based program. So we can't even meet the capacity of all the families who actually need care in the city because of the cost of opening and running these programs. I often share, and I'll share briefly, it takes a year or more to turn a space, if it doesn't have a certificate of occupancy to be childcare, to turn that space into childcare. And childcare providers and entrepreneurs are financing that, for a year of no income coming in. You're paying for construction costs. You could be paying for the lease space to your facility. You could be, and you have to be fully staffed before OSSI will grant you a license, which is the Office of State Superintendent of Education. Sorry, I always do acronyms, but they are a licensing body. So if I don't have staff to open classrooms, they're not going to open those classrooms. And then each time you want to open a new classroom with staff, licensing has to return. So I have to even bear the cost of being fully staffed before I ever receive a day of tuition from our families. And why am I sharing all of those line items? Because this is an expensive endeavor. So anyone who's venturing into it is doing so for the love of their work, the community, the children that they serve, the families that they serve. And I keep expanding because families keep coming to us. And then we don't really have capacity. So for example, if a center opens with infants, they're with you until they're 3 years old. So once you're full, you're technically full for the next 3 years with very limited capacity to bring in new families. So it's just this wheel that's turning of there's not enough capacity. We can't really create and expand capacity because of the cost of it. Centers can't bear the cost of paying teachers who we promised these new salaries. So DC is the only jurisdiction that is requiring teachers to receive associate's degrees and bachelor's degrees to be early childhood educators. And we promised our teachers, if you do this, there's a promise of better pay on the other side. So we have teachers who enrolled in associate degree programs, spent 3 or 4 years, even during the pandemic, of going to school and earning these degrees. And now they've had these few years of pay equity funding. And now we're like, oh, sorry, we no longer can afford that. We promised you this new salary based on your degrees and based on your credentials, but we're going to take that away. And for anyone who knows what that would feel like, if you've made a promise and I've kept my end of the promise, you have to keep your end of the promise. So we're going to lose our highly qualified educators who are now dedicated, did the work, kept their promise, received their degrees, because we can't pay them. We can't afford to continue to pay the pay equity supplements for us. So our educators will leave. They'll go to public schools or public charter schools or other programs that can now pay them. So for example, if you have an associate's degree, that's roughly a $50,000+ salary a year. If you have a bachelor's degree, that's about $75,000 a year. Whereas before we were paying our staff $30,000, $28,000 to $35,000 on average. So it's, in some cases, it doubled their salaries. We can't, we programs cannot bear the burden of the cost of continuing to pay those educators those new salaries without the pay equity funding.
We are certainly getting an education about the complexities of sustaining daycare for daycare providers, parents, and in the midst of this issue regarding the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund. I need to take a break as we continue this conversation, so please stay with us. And don't forget, you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Daily Drum will continue on Sirius XM channel 141. The Original Quiet Storm with John Mons is next. That's on WHUR. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 in just a few seconds. Now, welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We are continuing our discussion about a looming daycare crisis in the District of Columbia. My guests are LaDawn Love, DC Child Care Advocate and Executive Director of Spaces in Action, a grassroots community organization supporting families and child care, and Lashada Ham Campbell, owner and director of Petite Scholars Daycare for Infants and Toddlers in DC. I want to kind of pick up where we left off, because you really helped to answer one of the questions that I had about how much the instructors, the teachers in your locations, Lashada, are paid. And I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that fund, the Pay Equity Fund, helps to supplement that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So I guess my question to you, LaDawn, and you mentioned this earlier about there are other ways to help pay for this, this equity fund. So what do you suggest?
So there are ways we have a tax structure in DC.
Mm-hmm.
And once you make over I want to say people who are earning 500,000 or more are paying the same tax level as somebody who makes 70,000. So we need to change the tax structure and create a tiered system that will bring more money into the budget for DC. We can also look at home ownership, where there are homes that are valued at $2.5 million or more. The property tax can go up a little bit, and that will generate dollars. So those are some ways. We can also look at capital gains taxing. There's a lot of capital gains that are earned in the DC area, and that's not being taxed. So that's 3 ways that we can increase the budget to make sure that we have money for programs such as the Pay Equity Fund, but also for many of the other services that are needed in the DC area. So when the mayor talks about revitalizing downtown, she needs to think about all of DC. And the businesses will not thrive if there's not a childcare sector to take care of those children.
What do you believe, LaDawn, would be the consequences if this Pay Equity Fund goes away?
Well, let's look at Maryland and Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Maryland and Virginia, as well as the rest of the country, have been looking at DC as a pathway forward because DC began to invest in its childcare sector. So right now you have DC and Virginia and Maryland. Gotta get my geography right. Virginia and Maryland working to change the way that they pay their childcare sector and changing the way they invest in their childcare sector, mirroring what DC was investing in, while DC is thinking about divesting in the childcare sector. So we could expect that people will leave DC and seek work in Maryland and Virginia, where the salaries will go up and where there'll be benefits. So that will create a further crisis in the DC area. We don't want that to happen. We want people to be able to live, work, and thrive where they are. So if DC does not get its act together, DC can lose workers. And if the workforce goes down, then we'll have other challenges from the tax base of people who are working in the city, who are then looking for other places to work. So we need to make sure that DC does not take away the Pay Equity Fund. And what I want to stress is that the mayor put this in her budget. Her budget has not passed. The council is now creating its budget now that it's heard from its people and also have been talking to each other. And so we still have a chance to keep pushing for the council to fully restore the Pay Equity Fund. And the budget vote will happen. There'll be an announcement of the budget towards the end of the month, probably around the 29th of May. But between now and then, Lachey, we got work to do. We got to make sure we keep putting that pressure on the council to make sure that they continue to have the pay equity fund front and center. Like I said, we've heard a lot of the council members say that they are committed to making sure that funding gets put back in the pay equity fund. That does not say an amount, though.
So, and I wanted to mention, by the way, that we are expecting to hear from Ward 5 Council Member Zachary Parker during this conversation. And as soon as he comes in, we will talk to him about some of these issues. Lashada, I did want to ask you, I wanted to go back to some of the numbers that I mentioned earlier. And you are in a position to know this. DC, highest in the nation, averaging about $24,000 a year for childcare, daycare. Is that accurate?
Yes. And I will tell you why our fees are so high. It's because of the cost of staffing, the cost to meet ratios. So, for example, the ratios in DC are within the average of 4-to-1. However, if you're going to have a center that opens from 7 a.m. to 6 a.m. to serve working families, you essentially need to, by 30%, increase the number of staff that you have in order to meet the hours of working families and their needs. The second part is the cost of our rent. We are in spaces where the cost per square foot ranges anywhere, I would say now, from $40 to $60 per square foot. Which creates a cost of over $1 million a year in your lease space if you don't own your space. And we often get pushed out of spaces because of all of the development within DC. So prices and costs associated with running a childcare center are high because the costs to run these programs as the business owner are high. So our margins are slim. And it sounds like, oh, you should be making money hand over fist, and you're living in a life of luxury. And I had a gentleman, Maurice Sykes, who's very instrumental in the early childhood community in Washington, D.C. And one day he said to me, in order to be a viable program financially, you need to have programs with 100 kids. And I was like, well, I have less than that, and even half than less than that. And so most of our programs are not serving 100 children. And that is why our costs are high and the cost of tuition is high, because that's the only way to make these programs exist. We have to, unfortunately, charge more than our neighbors in Maryland and Virginia. So it's just the cost of doing business in DC, unfortunately.
So as I mentioned in the beginning of the discussion, you have 6 centers working on a 7th center. They are you said all of them are in Ward 5, but obviously in different locations. And is the cost the same across all centers? I know you're working to open up a center on Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill is Capitol Hill. Are the prices going to change for that center, or are they the same?
No, I intentionally keep us priced right in the middle of whatever the current or average tuition is. And all of my campuses, honestly, with the exception of future Capitol Hill, are within a 1-mile radius of each other. You can walk from one campus to the other. And these are in neighborhoods, Brooklyn, Edgewood, Bloomingdale, Woodridge. So those are all close neighboring, bordering on each other neighborhoods within Ward 5. So the cost, if you attend one campus versus the other, is always exactly the same. Again, the size of the programs are always nearly the same. There's one campus that is just held up by the other campuses because it only has a capacity of 19 children. But that one exists because the space is needed. So I literally have a model of wherever I can get in and fit in, and it makes sense as far as the space. So for example, if you want to serve infants, which is the majority of the need for a DC program, because our children in the city can go to school at age 3 because of our awesome universal preschool program, but your facility has to meet the needs of, emergency egress for infants. And it's difficult to find facilities that can always meet all of the health and safety needs as far as what's required to make a space a childcare center. So it's, again, difficult to find space. difficult to maintain space because of redevelopment. So again, neighborhoods with families who need childcare, we can only serve less than half of the families who actually want childcare. And that's why 6 exists and the 7th is coming. But I could open 10 more and I still wouldn't put a dent in how much childcare is still needed in the city. And the city has worked to do so with the charge of the mayor, with helping to fund programs as far as giving grants to help build out and create new slots. Like right before COVID, that was a charge of the mayor that, and I know that we filled a lot of the capacity as far as what her charge was. And forgive me for not having those exact numbers of how many new slots she wanted to create. But this has been a known fact that we've had a deficit in the childcare sector. We cannot meet the needs of the families that need childcare because of the lack of availability. And it would be, I don't even have the words, it would be horrendous if pay equity further creates this space where childcare centers are going to close because they can't get staffing, or childcare centers are going to close because families are exiting the city. So we talked about families may leave because of other issues, but crime has been a huge factor. And we get little data points as in the childcare sector where, let's say 3 or 4 years ago, it would be once a year that I would have a family announcing they're leaving the city. I get those emails every month and sometimes 3 in a month because our families are moving to nearby counties in Virginia and Maryland, and crime is a huge factor. Wherever one of our campuses exists, there is a rate of crime or shootings or just things of that nature, carjackings, that have created this space where our families don't feel safe. So,
and if I may, speaking of that, if I'm not mistaken, your Bloomingdale Center had an incident. It was earlier this year with a man who attacked your teacher.
Our staff. Yeah, that was October. As we speak, the Rhode Island Avenue campus is on lockdown because of shooting at 20th and Kearney in Northeast. Literally yesterday, the campus, someone shot at an Uber driver, and the teachers and families, as they're dropping off and entering a drop off, heard the gunshots nearby and everyone went into a panic. So like every campus, honestly, over the course of the last decade has had some horrendous, I've had teachers who were carjacked literally in front of the campus. So I could go on and on about crime and how it has directly impacted our families, directly impacted the staff. But it is yet another factor of we want to be a desirable place for families. We don't want families exiting en masse, and we can't be a desirable place for families if we can't take care of their children. And that's whether it's early childhood education or even cuts to funding that's I know is going to happen with subsidy for childcare. There are families who, based on this new budget, will no longer be able to afford childcare because they're getting subsidies that are going to be cut as a result of the mayor's cuts to the budget. So it goes further than just, pay equity for the teachers. There's also healthcare for our staff. Yeah. Our staff now receive healthcare as a result of pay equity. I pay for their children's healthcare. I can't afford to pay for their children's healthcare if there is no pay equity. That is a sacrifice that I'm making financially to say to my teachers, I'm going to help take care of you and your family as well. But programs who want to do things of that nature can't do so if these cuts take place.
Let me bring in DC Ward 5 Councilmember Zachary Parker into this discussion. Councilmember, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Certainly. I know we don't have you for a long time, so I want to get right to it. You are acutely aware of this looming crisis regarding the childcare in the District of Columbia, specifically, of course, the mayor's proposed budget cuts to the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund. Your reaction to that? Can this be saved? If not, are there any other options?
It will be saved. I've said repeatedly that the Pay Equity Fund, as it's often referred to in short, is a non-negotiable in this year's budget. Our early childhood educators, many of them women, many of them Black women, Latinas are doing the very important work of nurturing and teaching our young people in some of the most vital years of their lives. And what this fund is essentially saying is for a commitment of going back to get your education and for the very important work that you're doing, we're going to more fairly compensate you. It's a commitment that the district must keep. And I'm heartened that many of my colleagues have said that they agree. In the fiscal year 25 budget, we need roughly $70 million to maintain this program. And the chairman has already indicated that he's committed to finding that money. There is an ongoing debate, as you may know, between the CFO, the mayor, and the chairman around refilling one of the district's reserves. It's important to note that the mayor has said the reason she cut the pay equity fund is because of that back and forth, and the CFO forcing the mayor to replenish that fund over the financial plan. Now, that may be way in the weeds, but all that, I think that's going to be in the backdrop of a lot of this. The chairman has sought out a legal advice from our attorney general, who essentially has said that our CFO does not get to make policy choices, and that reserve does not have to be replenished over the financial plan. And so I share that to say there are two tracks that this fight for the pay equity fund is happening on. One is around the merits of the program. I think everybody is there. The other is how do we actually pay for it and protect the funding for the program over the financial plan? And I fear and suspect that fight is going to continue to carry out over the next month or so as we take up the budget for a vote.
In short, where are you going to find $70 million?
And that therein lies the big question, and which is why I'm bringing up the fight with the CFO. At the crux of the issue is the CFO is saying we need to replenish roughly $220 million by fiscal year 28. Everyone agrees that we have to do that in order to have enough cash on hand to pay the district's bills. The debate is whether or not that money must be accounted for in the financial plan. To account for it in the financial plan means you cannot spend $220 million on other worthy programs, i.e. the pay equity fund. The chairman has asserted through surpluses and other means, we can replenish that fund by fiscal year 28 without accounting for it in the financial plan. That is the fight to watch. I am of the mind, and I associate myself with the mayor and the chairman here, that the council gets to make policy choices. Yes, we need to refill that reserve by fiscal year 28. It does not need to be accounted for in the financial plan, and we must maintain the pay equity fund. There are other conversations happening in the background around revenue raising taxes. While there are no confirmed deals made there, that's another way that we could potentially save this program. But all that to say, the pay equity fund is a non-negotiable in the fiscal year 25 budget.
So before you came on, one of the other members of this conversation, LaDawn Love, was talking about the $500 million that was, as she said, with the swipe of a pen, the mayor has, allocated for Capital One Arena to keep the Wizards and the Mystics in DC. She also made some other suggestions. Let me not speak for you, LaDawn, but briefly share with the council member what you were sharing with me about how the city can pay for this, and I'd like to get his response to that.
Sure. So, Councilman Parker, how are you?
Good to see you.
You too.
Both of you.
So we were talking about, well, I mentioned specifically capital gains tax, also looking at increasing the taxes that are paid on homes that are valued at 200.5 million or higher. And then also looking at other ways to generate taxes, not looking at, which I didn't mention before, payroll taxes or increasing sales taxes, which the mayor also proposed.
That's right. And it's worth highlighting, the mayor has already increased taxes in her proposed fiscal year 25 budget. The question is, should the council also raise taxes in addition to what she's proposing? Those conversations are ongoing. There are some that would say raising taxes are a deal breaker. I'm of the mind that we must maintain very vital programming and need to find a way to do that. I'm also fighting for a child tax credit in this year's budget and trying to find a pathway for us to do that, as it will provide a lifeline for low-income and middle-income families. You brought up monumental sports, and that is a comment or a question I hear repeatedly. How do we pay $500+ million to monumental sports, but we don't have enough money for the Pay Equity Fund and other programs? I will say two things. Monumental sports staying in the district is very important. And it was essential that the council and the mayor stepped up to keep that team here for a number of reasons. Chief among them, our downtown generates revenue that benefits the entire city. Monumental Sports serves as an anchor for our downtown corridor. And having that team or those teams leave the district would have spelled doom for our schools, our parks, our recreational programming, across the board. So it was important that we do that. Secondly, that funding came from our capital budget, essentially the budget that allows us to build things like a new arena. And that is different than our operating budget, which is where we would pull money for the Pay Equity Fund. That said, it was still very important that we keep monumental sports here in the district, not just for the symbolic value of having our teams here, but because downtown generates hundreds of millions of dollars in our coffers year to year that allows us to maintain our robust programming.
What would you say, council member, to someone if this proposal were to go forth, I wouldn't even say proposal, idea that taxes would be increased to pay for these kinds of programs, to someone who no longer has toddlers, who doesn't have young children? Say, well, I don't have young children. Why should I have to pay for this? What would be your response to that?
The theme of the mayor's budget in fiscal year 25 is shared sacrifice. And I believe we all have a role to play in building back our city from the pandemic. Our budget cannot be balanced on the back of early childhood educators, on Black and brown folk, on communities that have seen decades of disinvestment. And it's going to call for all of us to give more. I also believe the district needs to look at how we are spending and growing our government. I have proposed a restructuring of the Office of LGBTQ Affairs. I believe there are many offices that we should examine and answer the question whether or not they are vital to the district's performance and service to residents. And I think we could do both of those things. So what I would say is we all need to give more, and it is our responsibility to ensure that we are examining our spending while also asking residents to give more if that is the path that we go on. And I would just conclude by saying we are at a pivotal point in our city, both in terms of public safety, in terms of how we continue to grow following the pandemic. Our schools, our young people are at the nexus of this pivotal inflection point for the district. And what we do today will inform how we live tomorrow. And I am of the mind that the more you meet people's basic needs, providing them housing, providing them livable wages, ensuring that they have access to mental health services, the more that we can all live in the healthy communities that we deserve. And so we shouldn't see it as we're giving something to early childhood educators and I don't have a child, but we're all residents and neighbors in the district, and we all have a role to play in this shared sacrifice that the mayor is calling for.
I know I have to let you go. Real quick, National Day Without Care, May 13th.
Oh, so that's us.
Oh, that's you.
Yes. So on May 13th, Councilman Park, I hope you come out, and Lachey, we need you there. On May 13th, we'll be outside in front of the Wilson building, and we're going to take over Freedom Plaza and make it a children's zone, because we want people to see how important it is to create spaces for our children. And also we'll have programs from across DC coming down to be a part of that day. And at the same time, people will be having events across the country. At least 26 different states are having an event that they're also calling a Day Without Childcare, because we need to elevate the voices of teachers, of parents, and show the impact that it has on children when we have viable and investments in early childhood education.
Council member, thank you so much for giving us a bit of your time. I appreciate you coming in and sharing with us. We will certainly be in touch with you, sir.
And if I could just add very quickly.
Sure, please go ahead.
There are ongoing conversations as we fight to protect this program, to make changes that would allow the program to be sustainable in the future. Some of those changes include healthcare, the pay, the starting wages for early childhood educators, the pay equity fund of sorts, if you will, for the child care center itself. And how we couple, or should we couple, the pay for early child educators with the WTU, or our K through 12 teachers. Those are ongoing conversations. Essentially, what we're trying to do is protect the program, but also make sure it's sustainable for years to come. I'm of the mind we should pay our early childhood educators for every dollar that they're worth, and they are invaluable to the lives of so many. So I just wanted to throw that in there for context.
Thank you so much, DC Ward 5 Council Member Zachary Parker. Always a pleasure to talk to you, sir, and we certainly will be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. I in this last 4 minutes or so, I wanted to give you both an opportunity to just share some final thoughts about this. Obviously, Lashada, gone are the days when grandma or auntie is there to support, new parents the way they used to do back in the old days.
I think when you ask Councilmember Parker the benefit to everyone and why everyone should care about the existence of early childhood education, especially those who are long past having children or having young children, the benefit and the research has been extensive to how what happens with children from birth to 3 creates a lifelong trajectory of being a learner, of being someone who contributes to the society, of attracting families to our communities. Like, we could list on and on and on why everyone should care what is happening with the early childhood educational community. We want our providers to, yes, have those associate and bachelor's degrees and be better able to provide care to our children, because we are their first educators along with their parents. We're laying the foundation for our next generation who's going to be taking care of all of us when we're elderly. And we see the United States has fallen further and further behind nationally, globally, in our ranking as a society of people who are able to read well, to do math, do science. And it all starts with what is happening in the early childhood classroom. When I was a principal in DCPS when universal preschool was just becoming a thing. And there were so many principals like me who were like, why are these 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in our buildings, and what are they doing? And why are they learning, to play in the sand, a dramatic play? Like, this isn't school. No, that is the foundation of learning how to be a responsible, respectful, caring citizen. We're teaching our children all of the basics of, everything I needed to know. I learned in kindergarten of how to be.
I've got to stop you because I've got to let LaDawn get a word in.
Yes,
I appreciate your passion.
Yeah. I appreciate your passion as well.
Yeah.
I just want to add that a study by Mathematica shows that the Pay Equity Fund has increased the early childhood workforce by 3%. It's worth investing in, and it's not something smart to divest from. And 13% of people who have children find that they're either quitting their job, refusing a job offer, or needing to adjust their work schedule if they don't have access to childcare. So we need to make sure that we are investing in childcare in DC. DC needs to continue to be an example of what should be happening in other parts of the country. I'm happy to see that the council is talking about putting this investment, but we're not going to get up. We're not going to let up on the pressure, and we'll be out there on May 13th and beyond to continue to put up our voice to say, invest in the Pay Equity Fund, invest in healthcare for childcare, invest in the early childhood sector.
Ladies, thank you so much for helping me to understand, helping our listeners to understand. And obviously, we are going to continue to keep our ears to the ground and listening to this issue as it continues to evolve. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, May 7th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.